looking for. Mhm.
A letter which was sent to him and which was simply written, Khushwant Singh, Bastard, India.
Quality which you get here, the quality of audience which you get here, cannot be matched in any part of the country.
Khushwant SinghLitFest. Last year I was here to launch my book, celebrating a very special woman in my life.
It is believed that really, really good sex meant that the marriage would be stable. If the marriage was stable, society would be stable. And if society was stable, the kingdom would be stable.
Jaffi there, I think has been much talked about. Do you regret having done what you did?
Mike Jaffi was no conspiracy, it was no Raphael deal. Good Lord.
What I can say is it's been stimulating, it's been attentive, it's been large, and it's been very agreeable.
जहाँ हर धर्म के लोग अपने ईश्वर को रब के नाम से पुकारते हैं। इसी सरहद पे कल डूबा था सूरज, होके दो टुकड़े।
Hi everyone, welcome to the first digital Khushwant Singh Literary Festival. Let me tell you a little bit background about how the KSLF, the Khushwant Singh Literary Festival, first began. I am Rahul Singh, the son of Khushwant Singh. About 9 years ago, when we were in Kasauli is where Khushwant Singh has a family home and where he did much of his writing. So when we were there, we met the then Brigadier, and we had chat with him, Brigadier Anant Narayanan, who's now a general. And the idea formed that why not have a Khushwant Singh Literary Festival in Kasauli? And the beautiful venue was the Kasauli Club. I don't know how many of you have been to the Kasauli Club, but it's got a beautiful terrace, open air terrace, which we cover up with like a shamiana, and it overlooks the valley, beautiful view, and then Chandigarh behind in the background. So that became our venue, and we've had it for 8 successive years. This year, obviously, we can't have it there. So the theme of this year's Digital Lit Fest is a new life. It's centered around the pandemic, naturally. And we try to, in all the Lit Fest, embody some of the values, passions, and concerns of Khushwant Singh, like his concern for the education of the girl child, his wanting to preserve the ecology and the environment, and also our Lit Fest being in a cantonment and with the brigadiers, successive brigadiers supporting us, is also dedicated to the Indian soldier. Naveen Mahajan, the present brigadier, said that why can't we have it again this year in the Kasauli Club? But frankly, it didn't turn out to be really practical. So we're having the digital Lit Fest instead of that physical one. Let me tell you a little bit about my father. And yesterday, Sudha Murthy, one of the great philanthropists of our time, she's the wife of Narayan Murthy, but a person in her own right. She mentioned about how, you know, love and compassion for one's fellow beings was what motivated her, really. You know, she's a very simple person, married to one of the richest men in the country, and she just does this out of love. And in my dad's study in Kasoli, there are portraits, pictures actually, of two people he admired most. One was Mahatma Gandhi, and the second was Mother Teresa. And there's a note there from Mother Teresa, which he's also framed up after he had written an article on her for the New York Times. She wrote him a short note thanking him for the article because, a lot of people saw it all over the world. And then she ends by saying, I'm told you do not believe in God. And then says, I send you God's love. How touching. And there's also a picture of Mahatma Gandhi. And I'll just relate one anecdote. My father was teaching comparative religion at Princeton. And along with him was another person who was there researching, Louis Fisher, who wrote probably one of the best biographies of Gandhi. And I'll just relate one anecdote from that biography, which is stuck in my mind. And it's about how the man who was opposing Gandhi and was a great supporter of apartheid in South Africa, we're talking about, was Smuts, General Smuts. And he was, he put Mahatma Gandhi in jail several times. So he was a real strong opponent of Mahatma Gandhi. But Mahatma Gandhi had this unique knack of turning even his opponents into his admirers. And while he was in prison, he sewed some sandals for Smuts from cloth that he had. And when he was leaving South Africa, finally, he was on the boat, and a note came. And he opened the note. It was from Smuts with a very worn-out pair of sandals, saying, "I've worn these sandals for many years since you gave them to me, even though I did not think I was worthy to stand in the shoes of so great a man." I get moved whenever I relate this also. Anyway, that's a little bit about my father and the influences that he had. Now I'll hand you over to, but before I do that, one of our speakers today is Harsh Mander. And he has written, and he'll talk about his latest book, but he has talked about the migrants, that issue of the migrants after the pandemic struck and and it struck a chord with me because it's very much like what my father wrote in his first and most celebrated novel, Train to Pakistan, about partition and how people went back. About 10 million people went back and forth, carrying just the bare belongings that they had on their heads, going by tongue, and of course, a lot of killings took place. Anyway, I think Harsh will talk a little bit about that. So let me now hand you over to Indra Chandrasekhar, who's been to Kasoli many times for the LitFest. We all know her as Indy. Indy, over to you.
Thank you, Rahul. It's such a pleasure and a privilege to be here as part of the Kasoli LitFest as it starts off with the Khushwant Singh Literary Festival. I think of it synonymously with Kasoli as we start off digitally. This really is such a unique and special festival built around and in memory to celebrate Khushwant Singh, who is one of the great literary icons, of course, of the subcontinent. But what I've learned, I never had the privilege of knowing him personally myself, but what I've learned over the years attending the festival at Kasoli, and of course from all the legends that surround him, is that he was indeed a great literary icon, a writer, and a visionary editor, but also that he had this great spirit of fun and joy in the ridiculous. And I think it is all of these things that the festival that Niloufar and Rahul have built together at Kasoli really embodies. And for me, as a writer and an editor and a literary curator, it's been an inspiration because there have been so many wonderful sessions, so many wonderful conversations, such a lot of mind-opening events that we've been part of, my husband and I, at Kasoli, and we've had so much fun. So I thank Niloufar and Rahul for organizing the festival always, and also for the privilege of being here and announcing these wonderful speakers and these wonderful sessions. I think the first session of the evening, Rahul has already spoken of, but one of the remarkable things about this whole evening, this whole set of sessions, is that it celebrates 3 new books. And to be part of the entry of 3 new books into the world, 3 thoughtful, profound, important books as we are, all of us, learning to deal with the pandemic, all of us facing the fragility of the human species, but truly some of us facing that fragility far more deeply than others, it is a privilege. Use that word consciously, it is a privilege. So the first book, the world launch, I think we can safely say, the world launch of Harsh Mander's new book, Locking Down the Poor, is going to take place today. As Rahul already indicated, it really draws attention back to the other great migration that took place on the subcontinent, which was the partition, the migration that is associated, that was inevitable part of the partition. And this was perhaps not such an inevitable, but it took place, this great migration. And so, well, Harsh Mander himself needs no real introduction. He's so visible to all of us. We know him as an author, a columnist. He's a social activist who has worked with survivors of mass violence and hunger, as well as homeless. He works with street children. He's very much in the news as a champion of the underprivileged, and it's really a great honor to be present at this session as he speaks about his book, and to, as an interlocutor, a marvelous I know, again, she needs no introduction whatsoever, and so I don't want to greatly launch into an introduction of who she is. I think just launch into the session and not cut into the time for this book. Over to you, Natasha.
Thank you, Indira. It gives me great pleasure to be the first person to be talking to Harsh Mander about Locking Down the Poor, the book that is being launched today. Coincidentally, Harsh and I have been working very closely for the last 2 years, but particularly for the last 6 months since the lockdown was announced and India's poor were thrown into such disarray, many of them walking thousands of kilometers home to their home districts. The Karwan-e-Mohabbat, which is a people's campaign, kind of found itself in the thick of it, offering a humanitarian response, a solidarity feeding program. Harsh, you were out on the streets almost every day. You were meeting people, distributing food yourself, and also with a small team actually recording testimonies of people as they went through this large-scale suffering that we all watched so helplessly. And this book is born out of that moment. Tell us a little bit about how it emerged.
Thank you, Natasha. And just before I respond to your question, I did want to say that Khushwant Singh was somebody I deeply admired. And in the last years of his life, I had occasion to meet him over and over again about something else that was very close to his heart, and that was fighting communal hatred and building an India which was built around the idea of love and equal respect and equal citizenship for people of every religion, every identity. And it is that bond that I share with Khushwant Singh, with deep, deep respect and admiration. And so it's a special privilege to be here today. So Natasha, as you know, from perhaps the second day after, after we heard the Prime Minister speak, when I heard the Prime Minister, what did he say? He said in 4 hours, there's going to be a nationwide lockdown. Everything is going to be shut down. And he advised the Indian people to work from home, to stay at home, to keep social distance and to wash your hands frequently. And while he was speaking, I was stunned. I was saying that, does he not remember that there are large numbers of people who have no homes? Where are they going to stay? 9 out of 10 workers in India are in the informal sector. They earn every single day. How will they survive? He spoke about social distance. About 2/3 of our people, even in cities, if they have homes, the homes are there's a 6x8 or 10x10 hovel in which maybe 5-10 people live. How will they keep social distance? He's asking us to wash our hands regularly when we don't have water supply for the large number of our people. And the large majority of people didn't have any kind of access to healthcare. The public health system was completely broken. So in effect, what was the Prime Minister saying? The Prime Minister was actually speaking to some of us who have the privilege of having a home where we can have social distance, where we do have running water and can wash our hands, who do have jobs that will pay us, even if we stay at home. And I think that moment and everything that has happened in the last 6 months has demonstrated, what I call a moment of immense civilizational crisis. It has demonstrated that we live in a country where some lives matter and some lives are completely dispensable. Some lives have to be protected, and some lives, can be completely thrown to the wolves. And because I work with the homeless, I particularly thought about them because I know that even 2 days with no work and no food, and if the gurdwaras where many of them go would be shut, the temples and dargahs will be shut, there will be no work. They have no savings at all. What's going to happen to them? And therefore, from the second day, I decided that I must step onto the streets. And I was very touched by many of my young colleagues because there was enormous fear at that time, who felt the same way. And you also were among them. I recall asking one of my young colleagues, and it will always stay with me. I said, "Are you not frightened, son, to be on the streets in the middle of this pandemic?" And he said, "Yes, I am frightened of the coronavirus, but much greater than my fear is their hunger, and therefore I must be on the streets." And it is that solidarity. It was not charity. It was a feeling of solidarity that we must stand with each other, and it is that drove us. And as you know, people started pouring in money from around the world, and the Karwan-e-Mohabbat had actually come together. It was an alliance of people who believed in what I call radical love, fighting lynching and hate that had become part of our social life. It's the same group then that responded to the lockdown and what it was doing to our poor. And money came in. We started doing what we could to far corners. 10 million meals were distributed. But I think that much more than that, it was, communicating that we care, that we stand with each other. When what I think this moment has exposed is the middle class, about which I've talked about a lot as among the most uncaring people in the world. But when we were locked into our homes, did we not worry? Did we not think about what would be happening to working class people who somehow our lives cannot, from the moment we open our eyes and even before that, they deliver our milk, they deliver our newspapers, they clean our homes, they cook our food, they drive our children to work, they're there at every step of our lives, and we take them for granted. But when they really needed us, we were willing to just abandon them. We were happy to celebrate and bang thalis and light candles, because we felt we were being protected. We didn't care about the rest. We didn't care when the government is requisitioning international flights to bring home migrants. It is sending students from Kota in special buses. Pilgrims are being sent, but the migrants are not. And the last thing that I really did want to say, and what drove this book, was that the lockdown, not only even in its design, could never protect the poor. So it was designed in itself to protect some lives, which it felt it needed to be protected. But when migrants started walking, and people wondered, why are they walking? But what would you do? If we play a mind game, if any of us, the listeners, suppose you were suddenly in a place far away from what you call home, where your parents, your loved ones are, and suddenly you have no food, no work, and a crisis and an illness is there which seems to have brought the whole world to its knees. What would you do? You desperately want to be home. Why was it so difficult to anticipate? And people went out, and now scientific opinion is telling us that actually the reason why our infections keep rising, part of it was this particular lockdown, because when there were just 500 recorded cases in the country, if we had facilitated and supported people for 10-15 days to go home, and we had given an economic package that provided them enough money, minimum wages, which we calculated would cost not more than 3%, we would not have had this crisis at all. Instead, we locked them down in extreme hunger, standing, jowled together, begging for food, lines, and in these cramped places. So we actually fostered the rapid spread of infection, and only when it went into lakhs did they start going into the countryside. If they had gone into the countryside in the beginning, even China locked down just 5% of its population. We locked down 100%. And so it is this, it was almost an act of solidarity. It was an act of atonement for what we are as a people. That is why our solidarity action, that is why the book.
Harsh, I'm going to read a short excerpt from the first chapter. I won't die of corona, but before that, I will die of hunger. The first to be swept away by this entirely human-made flood of hunger are the city's homeless. It is almost immediate, because most among them have no savings, no stores of food to tide them over a single day. The Karwan-e-Mohabbat van drives with cooked food to a street corner in the walled city of Delhi called Company Bagh. Situated between the old Delhi railway station and the Chandni Chowk town hall, this is a labor adda. On any ordinary morning, you will find gathered here thousands of homeless men, some women, offering their services for casual work to anyone, practically on any terms. They are desperate for work and powerless to bargain for a decent daily wage. Within days of the lockdown, their numbers have swelled many times. People squat on the pavement and the edge of the road as far as the eye can go. A young man from Nepal says, I haven't seen a roti for 4 days, and to think that I earn my living making rotis in a tandoor. Most days I would earn 500 or 600 rupees. Today I am waiting hours for your khichdi. There are many skilled workmen like him in the food queue, he tells us. The word he uses is karigar, artisan. They often name the Prime Minister in their bewilderment and wrath. Why has Modi ji done this to us? If we are hungry, will we not be more at risk of catching the disease? I wish Modi ji would give them an answer. And it's a short excerpt, but it's kind of representative of almost, the theme in every book that you have written, whether it's partitions of the heart, of memory, of forgetting, or the profiles that you have done of various victims of communal riots, as well as homeless people. And I, looking at your work from a little distance, there are two overarching themes that are, very visible. One of them is to tell the story of those on the margins, those who everyone can see, but nobody is willing to look at, those whom we look away from, and simultaneously to call out those who are in positions of power and remind them of their role and remind them of the policies that they have neglected or not made. It's been almost over 2 decades of writing books, 3 or 4 decades of working. Has there been a progression? Have you seen an impact on the ground?
Impact, I actually started writing very interestingly. I always liked to write, but the idea of writing stories of people in the margins really came up when I was a teacher. I was in the IAS, I was posted in the academy in Missouri. 1992, when the Babri Masjid was demolished, the topper of the batch held a large, lavish party to celebrate the demolition of the Babri Masjid. I joined a year later, and having worked in districts, I know how much the attitude of a district officer, of fairness to all, his or her commitment to secular values, to caste equality, to gender equality, his or her courage of convictions, to stand up, against unjust orders from the state, and her compassion. How these, are can make or break literally hundreds of thousands of lives. And therefore, I as a teacher for those 3 years, I felt that I must try to talk to them about communalism, about the values of our constitution, what does secularism really mean, and about caste and untouchability and gender and so on. And I found after a point that I felt that I could really, I needed to make them think through their hearts. I needed to reach them through their hearts, and I needed for them to care, and then to analyze, not as something just as an intellectual exercise, but something that they really care about. And telling stories, I realized that recently Meryl Streep was when she was given the Lifetime award, and she was talking about films and stories. She said it's primarily a vehicle of empathy, and I felt that it was precisely that which drove me to start writing, and writing the kinds of stories that I did. So my first major book was Unheard Voices, which was a collection. Many of them were stories that I'd actually written for my students in the civil service, about people in the margins whom I had encountered, and to talk, and also it was very important for me that we don't see poor people as categories to be understood, or problems to be solved, or statistics to be gathered, etc., or even causes to be upheld. They're fully human, human as you and I. And so in order to tell their story with as much of the detail and the granularity of their humanity is what I struggled very imperfectly to do in my writing.
That's exactly what I was going to come to as well. That while it's a very, very unique. Your work puts you in a very unique position where you are in one place, very close to people who are victims of state policy and of communal violence and all kinds of social violence, social political violence. And on the other hand, having been a civil servant, being a teacher to some of the most privileged students, in the country and abroad, you're also connected to those who can bring about change. But another very, very important facet of your writing, like you said, is the granularity in the storytelling. There is no person who will appear in any one of your books without leaving a mark. Once you may forget the name, but you will remember the story. There's extraordinary detailing that you go into with every person's story, and we see that also in your most recent book, Locking Down the Poor, which has actually come out of 2 months of frenetic work. 2 months in which we were actually under lockdown and didn't have much opportunity to know people so deeply. Why is that so important to your storytelling? What does it do?
I think that you have to find a person interesting. Somebody has really said curiosity is starting point for empathy. I mean, you have to find that person interesting. And I do find, for instance, working on hunger, I recall this conversation with a group of Musahar Dalit women, and they were telling me about many things, and they said, what is the most difficult lesson that we have to teach our children? And I said, what is it? And they said, it is a lesson of how to sleep hungry. And they described actually how they teach their children that, there will be days, despite our best efforts, when we will have no food to give you. And how should you cope? And when they were speaking, I was thinking of my own daughter, and I was thinking about what life would have looked like to me if I could not. I had to teach this lesson to my child, that there will be days when I just, 10 days in a month, I just won't be able to give you food. I think that any discussion on hunger after that cannot be detached. It cannot be, like an economist or even a planner. It has to be from that place of empathy. And empathy also, I've learned, is actually 2 acts. Empathy is first an act of imagination before it can be an act of feeling. I mean, we understand empathy as feeling the pain of another, but we built a world where we are so separate. We see homeless people every day, but how little we know about their lives. Every single day in a city we see them. In my work with homeless people, I mean, the stories that I try to tell, just to take a couple of small examples, you'll notice that homeless people, especially in the summer and the rainy seasons, tend to sleep very close to the highway and on traffic islands. And then we read every now and then of some young dude who's highly drunk and running, driving at top speed in some expensive car, runs over 5 homeless people. And it seems so irrational. Why are they sleeping so close to the highway? And it took me quite a long time to understand from them. The reason was very simple. The reason was mosquitoes. They said it is impossible to sleep in those seasons with, surrounded by mosquitoes. It's only when you sleep very close to a highway where traffic keeps moving 24 hours that you can sleep. And then you begin to understand that in order to get just a few hours of sleep, we share a city with people who have to destroy their lungs forever, who have to risk being run over every night so that they can get some hours of sleep. That story can then you begin to understand. Or when we created our first shelter for homeless women, and I've written about this somewhere as well. I asked them, what has changed most in your life? And one of the women said, for the first time after 17 years, I could sleep, close my eyes at night, and know that nobody will rape me until the morning. And I think that even for imagination, I don't think any of them, me as a man or any of the men who are listening could imagine. But even as a woman, one act of sexual violence or even sexual harassment. We have this very fine friend of ours, a very strong woman called Priya Ramani. And one act of sexual harassment is something that she grappled with and bravely fought and has spoken out against. But think about a woman who every night has to sleep in a way that she's unprotected and anyone can come and rape her. And there's no police officer who will listen to her. There's no place of safety she can go. None of us are going to go out in candlelight marches for her. And then we begin, we have to tell that story for us to begin to understand why we should not, why are we still living in a city where some people have to survive in these circumstances. So therefore that storytelling and the detailing of that, and yet when you hear every detail of their life, they're extraordinary people. They're people like you and me, and they'll have their flaws, they'll have their strengths, but they are dealing with life, and we must know them in their fullness. But we must listen to them with true curiosity and true respect. That's what I try to aspire. Again, very imperfectly in my writing.
Yeah, it's true that one's everyday imagination is completely flattened. I mean, we kind of justify it also to ourselves. How will I go on a drive from my home to my workplace if I'm going to hurt over every child in a beggar's arm? So, I have to be able to do the little good that I'm capable of. We kind of forgive ourselves. And your writing opens that door again, and forces one to feel the pain. Why it's not even your own pain. Why are you so afraid of feeling it for somebody else? But and another aspect of this is the massive divide in the privilege of you as a writer, and you even as a human rights worker, and the helplessness of the person whose story it is. And every writer has to negotiate very delicately that contrast and work with it. And we grapple with guilt. We grapple with sometimes, we allow ourselves to be stoned. What is your process? What do you do?
Yeah, I think I'd resolved very early in my life, probably as a child, instinctively, that all my life and all my work must be at the place where there is the greatest pain. And I think that's, whether I was in the IAS and in the years later, that has been. And in a sense, in that pain, you have to try to become like a lightning conductor, which can take some of that pain and keep it within you and still survive and stand. And I think that many people teach themselves to stop caring. And I think that's not the way. That's not the way. You have to, even at the very worst, the pain that I feel and you will feel is going to be a tiny fraction, a very tiny, insignificant fraction of the pain that the person who's actually living it. And if you cannot live it, then why are we so self-indulgent with our own pain? And my resolve is therefore to keep telling these stories till your conscience aches unbearably. I must be at the place of greatest pain and to tell. But there is always the dilemma and the crisis about, as a person of privilege, I have the privilege of my class. I'm the son of an IAS officer. I've studied in expensive boarding schools. I have the privilege of my education. I have the privilege of my caste. I have the privilege of my gender. And how can I do this telling of the story in a relationship so fraught with unequal power, and to do it responsibly? And that's something that I've thought about a lot, and I thought I have one of my books which is called Fatal Accidents of Birth. I wrote in tribute to Rohit Vemula, who before he took his life, he left a note saying, "Whatever I could do, I could not escape the fatal accident of my birth." And I wrote this book in tribute to him. So to try to answer your question, I'll just read a few lines from here. I have never known the disdain of teachers who believe that I am undeserving of a future because I was born without merit. I have never been beaten because I aspire to worship in a temple that people say will be defiled by my step or my touch or veneration. I have never been humiliated every day of my life because I was born into a caste other people regard as unclean. I have never known what it is to cower as mobs armed with daggers and light bulbs full of acid raise terrifying slogans calling for my head and the blood of my loved ones, for the crime that I and others like me follow a faith different from theirs. To helplessly watch my children burn alive, the girls and women of my family raped, to see my family, my home, my work, my life savings, my entire world destroyed forever in a matter of hours, all for this one crime. I have never been ostracized and abandoned because I unknowingly contracted an incurable ailment like leprosy. I have never been shunned because I chose to sell my body to raise my children with dignity. I have never been banished from a world because I could not accept the gender into which my body was born. I have never slept hungry a single night because I did not have money or work. Far less have I known the desperation of not being able to feed my loved ones, of realizing that the only way I can ensure that my children live is to send them away to labor in fields, to wash utensils in a eatery, or to give them away to someone who may be able to raise them. And so on I go on. These can never be my stories or yours in all probability. But these are stories we must listen to, stories we must heed. For too long have we looked away. These are bleak and harrowing stories, but also ones of resistance and dignity. Far better than my telling these stories would have been for you to hear them directly from the people whose lives these are. I hope you will be able to do that one day, not to distance. But for the present, we still live in a world, one which we have ourselves created, where we can fly to other planets, but light years seem to separate us from those who live with and battle the worst of oppressions and cruelties. However, the truth is that the distance between human beings is no greater than the elementary recognition of our equal human dignity.
There is a question from Parlad Randhava, which is on the same theme, so I'm just going to read it out. How do you counter remarks such as they are Lutyens media, they are the Khan Market gang, and now, of course, the pejoratives have become much worse than this. So how do you counter the accusations that they're just talking about the poor over cocktails, sipping scotch? What's your response?
I think to be true to to keep examining one's own motivations, to use every barb as an opportunity to reinvestigate, to reaffirm who you are and why you are doing this. There are many ethical systems which can help us understand what you should do when you witness injustice. I thought I would, and I think Khushwant Singh would have liked this. I'll quote here from something that Prophet Muhammad said, actually. what is your duty when you witness the greatest of injustice as a human being, as a good human being? He said, at the very least, respond from your heart. Care. The better human being then responds from the tongue, which means you speak out about against it, or you write against it. The best of the human beings respond with their hands, which is to act against it. For me, I don't care if you shop at Khan Market, or you live in a big bungalow. As long as at least you respond to the first, at least you care. I teach a course now for the last 10 years at IIM Ahmedabad, and I say a few things to my students because they think that they're the best, of the highest merit and so on. I tell them 2 or 3 things. I tell them that, I want you to understand that neither are you in this room, nor am I in this room because we deserve to be here. We're here because 1 billion people in this country at least have not got the life chances that you and I have had. And therefore, just think, recognize the difference between merit and privilege. But when I recognize my privilege, I don't want, I'm not saying you should sink into guilt. I think your recognition of your privilege should create 3 things. One is humility. I don't deserve it. And the second is responsibility. That because of my privilege, I hold my privilege with great responsibility, as a trust. And the third is respect. I must respect people who haven't had the privileges that I have had. And I tell my students that, if at the end of my classes with you, the next time you see a young man your age, on a construction site, can you look at his face and say, wow, if he had the life chances that I had, maybe he'd have been a great engineer. And when you see, a young woman as a domestic help in your house, can you look at her face and say, if she had my life chances, she may have been a great writer, a philosopher, and so on. So I think that we have to deal with privilege, as I said, with humility, with responsibility, and with respect for others. And at the end of my own my full semester with them, I say that if there's one thing that I want you to remember at the end of all of this, if there's one minimum thing, is be kind. That first thing that Prophet Muhammad said, that at least respond from your heart. The next time, at least when there's the Prime Minister is talking about the lockdown, just think about the people around. Respond, at least care. And I think that if there was enough outrage, I was looking for that one act of solidarity. When people were being, all the students were coming home from quota, and migrants were walking hundreds of kilometers. Could we have had one student who said, I refuse to accept this bus unless you provide the same conditions to the migrant workers. I refuse to step onto this plane with the privileges that you're giving me unless you provide the same respect. And on the contrary, what our government's done, and it's done so casually. When flights were started, they said very casually, no, you don't need a certificate from a doctor, and quarantine is not necessary. It's not practical. But for the migrant workers, who were completely dispossessed with no money, you asked them to get, how did they get those medical certificates to get onto a train, etc.? How did they, and the kind of suffering at the other end of quarantine, etc. For the poorest, you will impose all of those rules. For people who can afford flight tickets, you're not. And we live so comfortably with this. And so that solidarity, I think it's, in my book, the last segment of it, I've called it a moment for civilizational introspection. can we use this moment? This moment is really, Arundhati Roy has said this very beautifully. She said the pandemic is a virus, but it's also an X-ray. It's an X-ray which has shown us who we are, what we are. Very, very starkly, like an X-ray. Having looked at this X-ray, what are we going to do about it? I'm appalled that after all of this, the government has, in recent parliament, actually, instead of saying that at last now, learning from this, we should have a regime of greater protection, social security for workers. But instead, they have weakened even the small protection that we have. That is the 3 legislations that have happened. I mean, we're not learning lessons of solidarity. We're learning lessons of even further deepening our distance from the poor.
There's a question which is quite similar to the question I was going to ask you anyway. So I'm going to combine them. One of the questions is, when those in power seem to feel no empathy for the underprivileged, what can we do to change the situation? And I was going to ask you anyway, after so many years of working with victims of communal violence, of constantly feeling that perhaps we have seen the worst, and the worst kinds of pogroms will not happen again, because we are so aware, because we are so ready to move when the time comes. And yet we were unable to stop the violence that took place in Delhi this year. We were unable to stop the mass migration that took place. So where do you derive your energy from? What is it that you would say to others who are looking for hope?
I think that I actually, I hold my governments accountable, but we must recognize that we choose these governments. We support them. We endorse them. The problem is to my mind not Donald Trump or Narendra Modi or Bolsonaro. It's us, because we are choosing and electing leaders. I'm told his popularity has, Mr. Modi's popularity has grown even higher after the kind of devastation and suffering that I think will last for a generation. What has happened now, the complete closure of our economy and the rebuilding, many of us feel that it might take even a generation, and the suffering already. We're not even talking about it, but families have reduced their food intake hugely, and people are living with suffering, and yet somehow we continue to choose the same leaders. And I think that one of the reasons is that these leaders are giving us, they're putting into our veins a kind of a drug of hate, and we are so intoxicated with this drug that everything is acceptable, including hunger, including joblessness, including no futures for ourselves. And this is again not just a template in our country. It is a template that I'm seeing being replayed by these right-wing strongmen, authoritarian leaders who are dividing, polarizing, valorizing hatred and bigotry, and who are taking away our freedoms, and who are still adored by significant segments of our people who are electing them. I think we have to. The problem is not out there. It is very much within us. What is it that we can do to rebuild a society that is founded on the idea of radical love and solidarity? And I think that is the biggest challenge for younger people. Every second Indian is below the age of 25. We've given you a terribly broken country and world, ravaged by inequality and by hate. How are you going to rebuild it? And will you pick up the pieces and imagine? It's not at all difficult to imagine, what we call universal social rights. At least let us say that we now, at least learning from what has happened, there'll be a floor of human dignity below which we will not allow anyone to fall. No child should sleep hungry. No child should have to sleep under the open sky. No one should die because they can't afford health care. There's just some basic. Everyone should get the same opportunities for education. And economists whom I respect a lot, like Prabhat Patnaik and Jayati Ghosh, have sat down and actually talked about how much this would cost the country. It's not more than about 10% of the GDP. Our tax to GDP ratios are among the lowest in the world, about 14%. Even the US has something like 24%. We need to tax the rich more, and we need to ensure a floor of human dignity. We need to ensure that at least henceforward we will not allow people to live with hunger and homelessness, etc., and absence of health care. That is what we need to do. And if we don't do it and we keep electing leaders who are instead giving us the drugs of hate and bigotry, then we are the problem.
Yeah, like you said, we are the ones electing the government. We are the ones who are consumers of the media that is peddling fake news.
Absolutely. And we are the ones who propagate it and amplify it. Natasha, I noticed the time is running out, and you're such a wonderful writer yourself. So before we end this session, how you came into this work. You have a long history behind you. You've encountered with me stories of extreme hate and extreme loss and extreme want. As a writer, as a human being, as a mother, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you've handled all of this?
Thank you for asking. It's I often wonder that you and I should compare notes on what we do in our personal spaces to rebuild ourselves, because every time we come face to face with the kind of stories that we did when we met families of lynch victims, when we met confronted mass hunger, there is something inside you that that shatters, that kind of tears apart. And yet, it's your own decision to have, walked into the work. It's your own commitment to write the story, and it's your own responsibility to put yourself back together so that you can go back to that work. And I think each time we do that, what emerges is a more resilient person. I don't feel stronger. I feel that somehow the breakdown is much worse each time, but also the confidence that, that with holding on to each other and drawing energy from the solidarity of each other, we will be able to come back together. Because, all the rest of the questions are very much about the same thing. How do we demand better laws? Is it better to be in the government than to be outside? What is it that we can do? And we really need to look at all these alternate spaces that people like you, people like us have created within the media, within the NGO sector, within the human rights work sector, and irrespective of labels. I think the time when the writer was separate from the activist, was separate from the journalist, was completely separate from the parent, that time is over. Every part of us is under onslaught, and every part of us has to come together and, offer a response, really.
Truly, yeah. And our strength has to be not from shielding ourselves from the pain, but from accepting and embracing that pain and injustice, and deepening our resolve to change things for that person and for the country at large and the world at large. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I'm going to repeat the name of your book, Locking Down the Poor. It's been published by Speaking Tiger, and it's going to be in the bookshops very soon. The digital version will be out first, and then the real book will be out. And really, one of the answers is that we need to read each other much more. We need to listen to each other much more, and we need to be much more unified in our response when we feel that government policies are hurting.
And Natasha, I mean, I just wanted to also say that please remember that a just and caring state can only exist in a just and caring society. It is in, the battle to change our country has to start with our family WhatsApp groups, with the conversations we have at our dinner place, in our workplaces, with our friends. We need to fight bigotry. We need to fight hate. We need to fight, caste prejudice. We need to fight class indifference, gently and firmly in the most intimate of our spaces. That's what, and it is from there, it is, we saw one partition on the land, which Khushwant Singh wrote so powerfully about. What we're seeing today is millions of partitions of the heart in each of our hearts. And I think that it is those million partitions that we have to fight together. And no one else is going to do this for us.
Thank you, Harsh. It's been a very, very inspiring session listening to you. The questions were very narrow, the answers were very wide. You showed us a much wider world. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Natasha. Thanks.
Thank you so much. A just and caring world. I hope we arrive there sometime. It was truly, as Natasha said, inspiring. Really deeply felt that in the face of such injustice that you look at with clarity and open eyes, you retain your grace and your dignity and your inner strength. And that is truly an inspiration. I think all of us will take into our cowardly middle class lives some strength and some commitment to deal with the dignity of all humankind. So thank you so much, Natasha. Thank you. You did a marvelous job of really opening up the session, and one can tell you're a writer because you entered the book with your eyes into the core of it. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Indira.
Yes. Thank you, both of you.
Very much. Thank you. So stay tuned, everybody, for the next session, which is coming up. Another book launch, which is going to be, again, very inspiring, addressing how to deal with the pandemic, perhaps, or what we must do to stay connected to humanity through the pandemic. It's going to be Farid Zakaria, the wonderful and articulate Farid Zakaria, with 10 lessons for a post-pandemic world, in conversation with Sarah Jacob. Thank you, everyone. See you at 7.